Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me for this fifth message in our series, Asked and Answered, shifting our mindset from expectation to revelation. And today we'll be considering the question asked by the religious leaders who brought the adulterous woman before Jesus. The question comes in on John 8:5. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say? And Jesus' response is in John 8:7. Let any one of you who's without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. God bless the reading of his word. Casting stones. My house of glass stands before me, sparkling in the sunlight, reflecting the blues of the sky and the greens of the grass, mingled with nature, merged into the magnificence of God's abundance. What a beautiful thing I have created, my home, my dwelling, my castle, a crystal monument to my own magnificence, resting on rock and casting no shadow. But wait, an unkindness of ravens has taken perch upon the dome, my eye to the sky, blocking sun and dreams from pouring through, preventing the feeding of my countenance. Shadows cast filigree silhouettes of pain and grief. This should not be, cannot be, a vile conspiracy to defile the view of my horizon. Vexing avians screaming at the sky in lightning cackles and thunderous caws. I carefully reach beneath my feet and grasp a stone, determined deterrent within my grasp. I take aim and throw to scatter the throng and clear my head of this veil of obscurity. The demons take flight, and I watch in glee as they flee the scene of my superimposed reality. But then, in horror, I watch as the stone meets glass. Spider webs of crinkling cracks merge, scourge insurgency against my creation, my soul's reality. This tower of glass collapses before me into sand and grit, taking with it dreams and schemes, the plans of man, my creation, my folly. We all are told it is not wise to build our castles on the sand, lest they founder in the storms of life, but somehow we forgot that glass is made from sand. Our temples of dreams that shine light on our faults, no matter the firmament of the foundations of our lives. We are only as strong as the weakest building block, our cornerstone, and if we choose elegance over purpose, beauty over structure, lies over truth, glass over good bones, something less than Christ for our cornerstones, we would be fools to engage in casting stones. In my first year of college, I took a summer class in physics. It wasn't because I loved physics, but because I disliked chemistry more than anything else. You know, I was required to take two science courses. The first was biology, which was not my forte either, but at least I had taken physics in high school. I had not taken chemistry, so I figured my best chance for passing was by choosing physics. I was extremely pleased with my C at the end of the term. There was a series of films lectures in this class called the Feynman Lectures on Physics, and we watched it as part of the class. And if you're into physics at all, you would know that Richard Feynman was one of the greatest physicists of his day, assisting in the work of the atomic bomb and on the investigative panel for the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. He was integral in the development of the concept of quantum mechanics and the theory of quantum electrodynamics. He was one smart cookie and very dynamic in his lectures. The lecture I remember the most was on the Tacoma Bridge. there was a disaster. That bridge collapsed. At the time it was completed in 1940, it was the third longest suspension bridge in the world, just less than the length of the Golden Gate Bridge and the George Washington Bridge. It took a little over 2 years to complete it and was located in Tacoma, Washington. It was a marvel to behold when it opened, spanning the channel of the Tacoma Narrows and the Strait of Puget Sound. And when the bridge collapsed on November 7th, 1940, just 4 months after its completion, it made the headlines around the world. Although no one died in the collapse, it brought new insight into the construction of bridges that continues to be used today. You see, the bridge did not collapse because of shoddy workmanship or inferior materials. It collapsed due to a lack of understanding regarding the physics of oscillation amplification due to the frequency caused by moderate winds. In winds of 35 miles per hour or more, the bridge would start to sway, and the frequency of that sway was amplified through the consistent push of the wind. Did you ever create waves in a bathtub? You know, the waves start out small, but with each push, the waves get bigger and easier to create, because you have the volume and momentum of the previous wave working to your advantage, and then the wave shoots out of the bathtub, and you have a mess to clean up. Not that I would know anything about that. No one took frequency into account when designing the bridge. The science wasn't unknown, it just wasn't usually considered in the building of bridges, and the winds on the on the channel of the Tacoma Narrows was a perfect storm just waiting to happen. Now, Feynman showed the film of the bridge collapse in his lecture to show an example of the event in all its glory. It was utterly fascinating to watch that bridge twist and turn like rubber before it collapsed. There was no visual reason that it should be happening, but science eventually solved the puzzle and changed the way suspension bridges are built today. Which brings to mind the story of the Tower of Babel found in Genesis chapter 11. When the book of Genesis, while the book of Genesis does not tell us how the Tower of Babel was, how tall it was, there were many references to the tower in other ancient texts. But when we search those texts for how tall the Tower of Babel was, we get answers like 328 feet, all the way up to 1.5 miles, which would make it almost 3 times taller than the tallest structure today. The Bible does not tell us about the destruction of the tower, but there are references in other ancient texts, and the reasons are as numerous as the versions. We do know that the Bible teaches us that God changed the languages of the construction workers to stop the construction, and the commonly held reason is its very construction was an affront to God, a validation of our own hubris as we tried to give credence that man struggles to find equality with God. Historical texts tell us thus that the tower was eventually destroyed. What does any of that have to do with the story of Jesus and the woman accused of adultery? Well, let's take a moment and refresh our minds regarding the story as it's told in John. At dawn, he appeared again at the temple courts, where all the people gathered round him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. Isn't it true that we get caught up in someone else's sin, ignoring compassion or the damage that we may be doing, just like those Jewish leaders? This story isn't about sin, as much as we would like it to be. It's about hubris. The same kind of hubris that we saw in the Tower of Babel, the same kind of hubris that we see in the Tacoma Straits Bridge. This woman caught in the act of sin is really not important to these law keepers. It is about a means to an end, a way to trap Jesus into saying something contrary to the law and to take him down a notch. When they say to him, "Teacher," it is with an air of sarcasm. The woman is secondary to their purpose. Their attempt to discredit Jesus with their question is more important than the sin itself. It could just as easily have been a man accused of murder, or a woman caught stealing, or even someone they thought was committing blasphemy. The sin wasn't important. While they were verbally talking about throwing stones at the woman, they were more focused on throwing religious and philosophical stones at Jesus. John continues his story. But Jesus bent down and started to write in the ground with his finger. And when they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and he said to them, "Let any of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again he stooped down and he wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, and with the woman just standing there. Jesus straightened it up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." People are really more curious about what Jesus wrote in the dirt. But I have come to the conclusion that it really doesn't matter what he wrote in the dirt. It is more about the action of the writing itself than the writing. Why would he do that? Here's a group of men with large stones, angry and trying to be intimidating, and Jesus stops to write in the dirt. All they need is a nod of Jesus' head to kill this woman. No one would have found fault in them if they did kill her. He knew this. The rebel rousers knew this. Even the woman knew this. But if he had given in to the intended legalism, it would have diminished the message and lesson Christ was trying to teach his followers. Which is why the crowd continued to taunt him into giving an answer. The crowd was not going to make a move until Jesus answered them, because they wanted whatever he said to be responsible for their next actions, not the sin of the woman. And when Jesus stooped to write, he put a pause in the equation, a moment for everyone to take a breath. He knew that those ready to cast stones would find it frustrating because they wouldn't cast a single stone without his input. Do you find having to wait frustrating? It's almost like picking you up. Someone doesn't call on time. Someone is late to an appointment or for a dinner reservation. Waiting in line on Black Friday, maybe. We all hate to wait, some more than others. Some people even become violent when they have to wait too long. But Jesus forces the crowd to wait. In all their tensions, he forces them to wait, which in and of itself probably made them even a little bit more angry. How many of them might have gotten so much more angry at this little stall tactic that they might be willing to change their minds and start throwing stones at him? When Jesus stands up, it's not in a hurry. He just slowly rises to his feet and addresses the crowd. "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Not the words they were expecting to hear. The law taught them that no man was without sin. They even sacrificed at the temple in case they might have accidentally sinned. If any one of them threw a stone, they would be committing blasphemy before God and would probably have become a target themselves. Notice that Jesus doesn't stand up and tell them that they are wrong or that the law is unjust. He doesn't even question the law. After all, Jesus came to complete the law. It was never about the law. It was about the intent. And the intent was to embarrass Jesus before his followers. And instead of being angry at their intent, Jesus does the whole right in the dirt thing again. Still, it doesn't matter what he wrote. Jesus has presented them with a conundrum. Instead of rushing them for an answer, he gives them plenty of time for contemplation. He wasn't trying to win an argument or convince them that they were wrong. He wanted them to think about what he said and find truth in the wrongness of their actions. They had to come to their own conclusions for the lesson to sink in. There was meant to be a moment of enlightenment and understanding, not a repeat after me moment. The best lessons in life don't come when we make an A on the test by remembering the answers, but in the moments where we find enlightenment as we understand the meaning and truth behind those answers. Suddenly, this crowd was no longer a crowd, but a collection of individuals struggling for truth that was different from what they had brought to the table. The only possible reaction they could choose and still maintain their dignity was to drop their stones and walk away. Now, if any one of them had cast their stones, their glass house of hubris and pretense would have come crashing down around them. After all, their beliefs had a foundation on the rock of God's law. Their structures were tied to unsubstantiated interpretations of that law and had no real basis in God's love for his creation. Their rules did not, nor could they ever account for God's grace in the equation. Their black and white interpretation of law left no room for mercy or compassion. Now, I don't want to forget about the woman, even though this story was never really about her sin. There's a story here that needs to be told, though. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, and the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I," continue. "Go," Jesus declared now, "go and leave your life of sin." Well, the story thus far has been about trapping Jesus and Jesus turning that moment into a teaching moment, and a new story emerges. We now have a one-on-one conversation between Jesus and this woman. Up until this time, the woman could just as well have been a lamppost. No one has said a word to her, not even Jesus. This doesn't mean that Jesus is ignoring her, but Jesus knows that in order to reach this woman, the threat to her has to be eliminated first, which he does. And while everyone in the crowd walks away, Jesus looks at her and acknowledges her. Do you comprehend the magnificence of the blessing she must have experienced by Jesus acknowledging her? Having cleared the way, Jesus now addresses the problem of the woman's personal sin. This is one of the most compassionate moments in the entire Bible. Having hit the pause button by writing in the dirt and letting those involved choose their path, Jesus now stops writing in the dirt and begins his ministry to this woman. So many of us would be tempted to say things like, "Boy, you really dodged a bullet this time. You realize you got lucky. They could have killed you. You know, you made your own bed and deserve to suffer the consequences. You are so lucky I was around to save you." But this is not how Jesus approaches this woman. It is not the way Jesus approaches sin in any of our lives. He knows of her sin. She knows that he knows of her sin. No one is denying or defending her sin. But Jesus does not start admonishing her about how she got into this situation. Instead, he asked her a question that they both know the answer to. Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? She's probably just a little confused by the question, since they seem to be standing in an empty street. But she answers, no one, sir. And Jesus responds with, then neither do I condemn you. Go and leave your life of sin. With that, the story comes to an end. Jesus doesn't spend hours admonishing her or preaching to her. He simply says, then neither do I condemn you. Where have we heard something like this before? This would be a great moment for Jesus to stand on a soapbox, point his finger, and proclaim the error of her ways. Maybe draw a crowd and preach about the evils of sin and the ramifications of committing sin. Maybe expound on the law of Moses like the religious leaders who had forced the events of this moment, and then point out the grace of God for forgiving her. She is evil. She deserves to die. The law says that this is true, but God forgives her. Maybe use her as an example to shine a light on sin and forgiveness. When we think about it, though, wouldn't that put Jesus in the same category as the religious leaders, using this woman to set an example, using this woman for their own purposes? God's love for all people as example to Jesus is not about crowdsourcing. It is a one-on-one, let's sit here and talk about this. I see you, I hear you, I love you relationship. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have an everlasting life. But like I've told you before, John 3:16 is incomplete if you don't include John 3:17. For God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world. Then neither do I condemn you. Too often we focus on other people's sins without even looking at those people, without even looking into their eyes, not considering their circumstances, their struggles, their pain. We just look at the black and white of the law and expect God to slam the gavel down and cry, guilty. God knows they're guilty. God knows we're guilty. But our relationship with God is not based on some warped sense of justice. It is based in compassion and grace. We don't know if the woman joined everyone else who was following Jesus. We don't know what became of her. But I'm pretty certain that this situation, this one-on-one time with Jesus, must have had a profound effect on her life. If we want that same profound effect in our lives, we have to have a one-on-one time with Jesus as well. This is not about a group hug. We have to allow Jesus to speak into us and let him tell us how much he loves us, and we have to do it at a personal level. We have to establish a relationship with Jesus Christ. We have to experience the joy of that moment when we realize that he is acknowledging us. We have to drop the casting stones attitude that we carry around with us. The I am better than her attitude. The she is a criminal and I'm not attitude. The he's a drunk and a loser attitude. We need to find within us the compassionate side of Jesus, who sheds his grace for all of us. No one better than the other, but each one unique and completely loved by God. By the way, in 1950, a new bridge was opened over the Tacoma Narrows Strait, which incorporated the necessary changes to avoid the problems with the residents. After that disaster, they paused to reflect on the issues with the first bridge and corrected their mistakes. They didn't give up. The bridge was needed, just as our relationship with Jesus is needed. We don't give up when we fail. We ask God to show us our mistakes and how to do better. We let Jesus ride in the dirt and give us time to reflect and then adjust our lives accordingly. That's how love works. Gentle enlightenment and persuasion through reflection. We are so fortunate that our Creator knows us so well that He is patient with us while we learn. Amen.